Today is Wednesday, June 8, 2011. My name is Joe Monnier of the Southern Oral History Program at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. I'm with videographer John Bishop, and we are in Columbia, South Carolina at the home of Justice Ernest Finney, Jr., and we are here to do an oral history interview for the Civil Rights History Project, which is a joint undertaking of the Smithsonian's National Museum of African American History and Culture and the Library of Congress. Justice Finney, thank you so much for sitting down with us and welcoming us to your home, and Mrs. Finney as well, and it's a real honor and privilege to be with you. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here, share this moment with you.
If I could, let me take you back to begin our conversation with some reflection, perhaps on your father and your aunts and your growing up.
Well, my father was a school teacher primarily, and my aunts shared the responsibility of rearing me since my mother had died when I was 10 days old. So it was a conglomeration between my father and my aunts, primarily.
Can you say a little bit more about your father?
Well, he was an educator, a graduate of Virginia State Virginia State College, and he was teaching in Smithfield, Virginia, and I was born in Smithfield, and he was a strict constructionist, I'd say, if he were a lawyer, but he ruled the roost in a fair and impartial manner, as long as I understood that he was the boss and I was to do what I was told to do when I was told to do it. But other than that, we traveled from one end of Virginia to another. I don't know how many elementary schools I went to, because all he had to do was get an offer of a better job, and we'd have our bags packed within 24 hours and be on our way to the next town. That's about how we got to South Carolina. He had been teaching school in Virginia all of his life, and when World War II began, he decided that he would go to Washington and work in the Pentagon. After a year or two there, he decided that he wanted to go back to teaching, and he went to Baltimore, where he taught at Morgan State University. And while at Morgan State University, according to the stories they told me, he got a call from Claflin College in Orangeburg, and they offered him a job in Orangeburg as Dean of Claflin. And lo and behold, the next thing I knew, I was on a train headed to South Carolina, a place I had never been to, had no idea. The only thing I knew about it was the stories I'd heard. And the stories were told by my young friends who advised me that I was going to a place where they were probably going to end up lynching me. But, and I thought they were telling the truth. When we got into Florence, the PD River, as I recall it, was on one of its high levels, and I said, "Oh my God!" The conductor said, "Florence is the next stop, and you change in Florence for Orangeburg." Well, I knew that this Orangeburg place was a place full of water and alligators and various and sundry other things. But lo and behold, when I stepped off the train in Orangeburg, they were human beings, they were nice people, and once I got to know them, they treated us as family. And all the stories that my young friends had lied to me about were exaggerated.
What year did you come down to Claflin?
I think it was 1946 or 45. I was a junior or something like that in high school.
Right.
And
yeah, okay. Other impressions, you just said that that the welcome you received by the community in Orangeburg and around Claflin was a warm one. Can you talk a little bit more about your impressions of the town, of the college?
Well, this was my first day, and I was scared out of my wits' end. I was in a strange town, didn't know anybody, and nobody knew me, and I didn't know what it was going to be like. But it proved to be a welcome that I was pleased with. And within a year or so after I had arrived in Orangeburg, I had a job. I went to work at the college soda shop as a soda jerk. And that was an interesting experience because the college soda shop was located right on the perimeters of two colleges. And that was where the young people hung out and drank sodas and ate hamburgers and enjoyed life. And the people were warm and friendly. The family that owned the soda shop was the Weber family, and the Webers were instrumental in the business community, and they treated me as if I was a member of the family. And I think I worked there for about 6 or 8 years, somewhere along in there.
Weber's an African American family or white family?
African American family.
Yeah. How vibrant was the African American business community in Cleveland?
Well, I was very young, so I don't have any independent recollection of the how vibrant the business community was, but it was an active community. It was a community that was actively involved in the events of the total community. One of the things I do recall during my stay at Claflin, either the first or second year, somewhere along in there, the Ku Klux Klan paraded down the street right in front of Claflin and South Carolina State. It was an interesting spectacle.
Were you and your father members of a church community?
Yes, we were. We were members of the Trinity United Methodist Church, which is located still right across the street from Claflin and State College.
So you enrolled in '48 as an undergraduate at Claflin.
Something like that.
Yeah. How did you? What was your sense of what you hoped to do and be at that point, as you can recall?
Well, at that time, I had not formalized what my ambitions were going to be. I think I probably formally set my goals after we left Claflin and went to Morgan State, and I got an opportunity to observe these positions of black lawyers and how they were treated in the black community in Washington, and it was interesting.
Oh, so after your stay, after your studies at Claflin, you went back to D.C.?
No.
No, I'm sorry.
No. I did not go back to D.C.
But earlier,
Earlier,
seen these lawyers, right?
yes.
Right. So that sounds as if that gave you some sense that might be a path you
That
wanted to
might be
explore.
where I wanted to hook my style.
Yeah.
You worked in D.C. in the summer.
Oh yes, I worked in D.C. before I came to Orangeburg.
Oh, okay.
I worked in a shoe store.
Oh, did you?
Yes.
In a shoe store. Oh, yeah. Can you tell me a little bit more about how you came to observe black attorneys in D.C. in those years? In what context?
Well, my family was always reading and doing something, and I remember there was a lawyer in Washington named Belford V. Lawson, who was president of a fraternity, who was a national leader. He was dressed always immaculately, and that's how I remember it.
You entered in the fall of '52. You began your law studies at the college in Orangeburg, College of Law, and there are many parts of that experience that I'm interested in asking about. Can you recall your sense of your fellow students and the faculty and the facilities?
Well, the faculty was dedicated, hardworking, Sometimes you'd go to class, we didn't have but about 4 students in the class. Sometimes you'd go to class, wouldn't nobody be there but you, the teacher, and so you got individual attention. And they did not play. They worked you hard because I gathered from my recollection of that period of time, the students and the faculty were out and about trying to make sure that South Carolina State's law school was able to produce the caliber of lawyers which would justify its existence and make it a part of the history of South Carolina. And I think they succeeded very well.
I think they certainly did. Yeah, yeah. One question I had was, do you happen to recall, I should have checked this before the interview, but I did not. Do you recall what year the University of South Carolina Law School was finally desegregated?
I do not.
Yeah. But it had not been desegregated and would not have been, I imagine, until maybe the mid-50s?
Somewhere along in there, because as I recall it correctly, one of the people responsible for the desegregation at the University of South Carolina was a student who was enrolled at South Carolina State named John W. Wrighton. And as a result of his activities, and I think he instituted a lawsuit which resulted in the desegregation of the University of South Carolina.
Yeah. On graduating and taking the bar, that would have been early summer 1954.
That's right.
Which was just then weeks after the Brown decision.
That's correct.
And I wonder if do you happen to recall your reaction to Brown and its discussion on the campus and things?
Well, as I recall it, the reaction was ecstatic. There was what we had wanted and what we had hoped for and what we hoped the Supreme Court would do in its decision. And of course, there was some trepidation because we didn't know what the implementing, decision was going to be. And it ended up being taking longer than we had hoped.
Yeah. To put it mildly, I guess we all think today, don't we?
Yes, yes, we do.
Yeah. Can you talk about what challenges faced a young African American attorney in the mid-50s trying to begin a career and a life in South Carolina?
Well, it was strange because by and large there had been very few lawyers black lawyers in South Carolina at the time I became a lawyer, and it was a new experience for the black community. As you would talk with them, they didn't understand that if you were a black lawyer, you could go in the courthouse and pull books down and do the things that a lawyer would normally do in order to perform his services for his clientele. So sometimes you'd take them to the courthouse just to show them you could walk in the front door of the courthouse. And you would continually try to encourage them to get their students, their friends, to submit their cases to you. And I think one of the things that was most disappointing to me as an individual was the fact that there was, with the establishment of the law school at South Carolina State, the establishment of a law school at North Carolina Central. And these two schools, in our view, were similar. But eventually South Carolina decided that in the exercise of its judgment that it would close the law school at the South Carolina State. And we had often wondered why. Because as my information now tells me that North Carolina Central has somewhere around 300 students, it's a fully integrated and a full part of the legal education program of North Carolina, whereas South Carolina State's law school has become a closed entity.
Yeah.
And to my perspective, it could have benefited, the state could have benefited if they had maintained that, and that's one of the disappointments we have in our life.
Yeah, sure. I live in Chapel Hill, just down the road from Durham, and so my sense of the history of Central's law school is just as you've described it. Yeah.
And its history was almost equivalent to South Carolina State. They were very similarly created and very similar in their structure.
Exactly.
In fact, many of the faculty members from South Carolina State, when it closed up this law school, went to North Carolina.
Right. Yeah. Through the 50s, you taught school in Conway.
No, not through the 50s, I think for about 6 years. Yeah,
Excuse
early.
me. Yeah,
Yes,
from
I.
about 54 to 59. Yeah.
Mhm.
What was that? Can you talk a little bit about that experience as a teacher?
Well, I was the son of a teacher, and so I had an appreciation of the significance of education, and it was an interesting and challenging experience. And it provided me with insights into the problems and dilemmas with which my student body was confronted. Not only did I teach school, but in the evenings we were down in Conway, and I picked up a job or two working at a hotel down there.
I know that there's a story sometimes recounted about your experience at a hotel in relation to the annual meeting of the South Carolina Bar Association. I wonder if you would recount that.
That's a true story.
Yeah.
I was working at the Ocean Forest Hotel, and when the Bar Association had its meeting down there, I think it was in 1954, 55, blacks were not invited to attend the social events. Though we were members of the bar, we could go to the educational seminars and things like that. But my first meeting of a South Carolina Bar Association, I went as a waiter at the Ocean Forest Hotel. And somehow or another the word got out, and later on in my career, when I became Chief Justice, I used to tell the story that my first meeting at the bar was as a waiter, but sooner or later I had acquired sufficient influence or connections or whatever you want to call it, that I was at the head table at a future meeting of the South Carolina Bar, which demonstrated to some extent the progress we were making in certain aspects of the culture in South Carolina.
When did you, I know in 1960, you're going to move to Sumter and become very directly engaged as an attorney in representing civil rights plaintiffs. But through that second half of the 50s, while you were teaching in Conway, did you have much engagement with the network of black attorneys who were litigating those early civil rights cases?
Well, we did have a close connection between the entire black legal community in South Carolina, and to the extent possible, with my limited capacity to be actively involved, I did keep abreast and kept me informed. In fact, it was as a result of a mission where Matthew Perry and I.D. Newman came through Sumter and advised me that they were on their way to somewhere about the opening of a state park, and that stimulated certain juices to flow, and as a result I made a decision that I was going to take my wife and 2 children, and no, 1 child, and leave Sumter and become a full-time practicing lawyer. Now, when I say full-time, I was reluctant to give up a full-time gig. When I went to Sumter, one of the first people that communicated with me was the president of Marsh College, Dr. O.R. Rubin. And I told him I was going to move, and excuse me, was there any thing that he thought that I could do? And lo and behold, he offered me a job teaching at the Marsh College in South Carolina history, which was right down my fifth. I now teach 1 class a week, 2 or 3 days a week. And so that aided in my transition from
Sure. Towards Sumter, yeah.
towards Sumter.
You mentioned Reverend Newman, and I believe in those years he was
Field Secretary of the NAACP. Yes.
Can you tell me some recollections about Reverend Newman? I'd like to have a description of him in the record.
As I recall it, and I'm getting older by the day, but as I recall it, Reverend Newman was actively involved in whatever Chief Counsel Perry was involved in the desegregation of the state park that they were working on. And Reverend Newman was actively involved in everything that was going on the civil rights community at that time.
Yep. Obviously, we're going to switch tracks here for a moment. Just that explosion of protest in early 1960, and how you then stepped forward to represent so many of the young people and others who were taking roles in direct action protest.
Well, ask you a question. I'll try to answer it.
Yeah, tell me about your recollections of the Friendship Nine.
Well, the Friendship Nine was a bit later on in the history. The Friendship Nine, I got a call from Rock Hill, and somebody said that there are some students connected with Friendship College that are about to do something that could cause them to be arrested, and would I represent them? And of course I said yes, I'd be pleased to represent them. And they were connected with the Congress of Racial Equality, as I remember it. And the Congress of Racial Equality's field secretary was a gentleman by the name of James T. McCain, who was very active. And guess what? He was a citizen of Sumter. So I knew him, and after receiving a call from the Rock Hill community, I decided I'd go. And the first time I got called to Rock Hill, I never will forget it. My old raggedy car broke down, and there was a story written up in the paper which says that the Friendship Nine's lawyer was unable to get to court and it had to be postponed. Well, that was not as newsworthy. I didn't know what they were doing it, but I got to Rock Hill eventually, and I got to meet these 10, 12 students, and it was a simple demonstration. As far as I knew, these 9 people were going to be tried and get convicted, and I would have gotten a bond and they would have been out. Well,
Tell me your thoughts about what do you think about our justice system?
somewhere somebody had not fully informed their lawyer as to what they were going up about. And lo and behold, after we had tried it and the judge had imposed his sentence, they then announced to me that they had a new facet of the civil rights movement. They were going to do their jail time and not put up a bond. That was the first I knew about that. Because in these days, the lawyers had to walk a fine line between what they could tell their clients and what the clients would tell them. So the first time I found out about jail without bail was after the conviction, as I recall it. I know I was shocked. And I was shocked for a number of reasons. There was another organization involved in that Rock Hill community called SNCC, Student Nonviolent Association. I didn't know who was calling the shots for the students, but I know I wasn't, and wasn't going to let myself get boxed into instituting some lawsuit or being available or participating in that. But they were ready to do what they were going to do. Yeah. And of the 9, I recall, I think, no, the Rock Hill 10 was what I used to call them. One of them withdrew from the demonstration aspects of that litigation because of his connection with one of the schools up there and his fact that he was a athlete of some kind and was worried that he would lose his scholarship.
Right. Did you think of yourself then as being, as in your legal work for civil rights demonstrators, most closely connected to your own private practice, to the state NAACP, to the legal defense fund effort? How did you think about your connections as a lawyer?
You had to be as involved as you possibly could in all aspects of the community. In other words, if you're going to justify your existence as a lawyer, you had to be in a position to articulate the concerns of the various citizens that you would represent. So I was most closely, I guess, identified with the NAACP because I knew the leadership and the better. I knew that the Sumter NAACP was right there, and the Sumter NAACP had a very active involvement in the total community. In fact, one of the things that attracted me to Sumter was the fact that it had an active NAACP chapter, and they were on the forefront of the leadership of the civil rights movement.
Excuse me just one sec, John. Can we pause?
Yes. We're rolling again.
Okay, we're back. We took a break to try to adjust some outdoor heavy equipment. Folks were doing some work outside. Justice Finney, you had just talked a little bit about your connection to the state NAACP and the Sumter chapter. Can you talk a little bit more, describe the volume of your work on behalf of civil rights protesters in the early 60s? Because you were quite busy.
Well, if you were going to be a lawyer, and if you were going to articulate the concerns of the black community, you had to be everywhere at all times involved. And we were a cadre of good lawyers. Interestingly enough, most of whom graduated from South Carolina State's law school. But they were hell-bent, bound, and determined to make the American dream a reality in our lifetime. Now, we didn't succeed in all of that, but of course we diligently tried. And every time Matthew and I used to talk about the fact that I don't know if we talked about it or we reminisced about it. We would say that if a Greyhound bus had a major wreck in front of our individual offices, we would not get the cases more than likely. That they would end up become clients of one of the more established law firms. And we had to continually work to take the cases that were not significant
Right. Yeah.
financially
Absolutely.
in order to make a living and to serve our clientele.
Exactly. Yeah. In 1963, you joined the South Carolina Human Rights Commission.
Well, it was another avenue of opportunity for exposure and to connect yourself with a segment of the population that was not. You must remember that in the days we're talking about, the headquarters of the White Citizens Council was Sumter. And at the same time, as I recall it, some of the white community was very active in the Human Rights Commission. I remember Mr. Dabbs was very active. So you would affiliate yourself with everybody who might offer you an opportunity to become involved in the struggle for civil rights.
Yeah.
And, I told you earlier about the number of schools I went through as a student, and I want you to know that I ran for political office
Yes, sir.
3 times. Got beat 3 times. But I never lost faith in the system. So finally I won.
Indeed, in 72, you'll win a seat on the state House of Representatives. But
Yeah.
but before I get to that,
Okay, go
I
ahead.
want to ask you. I'm very interested in 2 things. One, your perspective on evolving race relations in South Carolina through the 60s. Voting Rights Act obviously gets passed. There's some black candidates stand for election, obviously, in various races. And then you'll be a delegate. You were a delegate to the Democratic National Convention in
68.
Chicago. So those are 2 separate questions, but I'm interested in your perspective.
Okay. What?
What was your sense of the nature of evolving race relations in South Carolina through the 60s?
We was disappointed that we did not make more progress, and particularly were we disappointed in the fact that much of the progress we apparently were making did not benefit the most needy of the black community. And that's not an ancient story we're talking about. That's a current scenario that is still an issue. We have, I think, I'm probably cited it a couple of times. You come out of Spartanburg and you look at the schools in Spartanburg County, and you come down to some of the less fortunate counties, and you look at the conditions of our schools, and everybody's talking about the corridor of shame and various and sundry other aspects of our development. But we still need to spend more time, more energy on developing a school system that provides an opportunity for our children, in particularly the less fortunate communities to get the quality of education which will prepare them for living in the next century.
In 1968, obviously early 68, there's the horrible, all the shootings at Orangeburg, the so-called Orangeburg massacre.
Orangeburg Massacre.
Exactly. And a year later, watching the federal government's reaction to that and it's the Nixon administration's refusal to open a reinvestigation, you resigned from the commission.
Not only did I resign, but a man by the name of Ben Payton
Indeed.
Resigned. I think it was Ben, and several other people, because we felt that the federal government was not using all of its powers to see what the situation was and to investigate. And I was chairman of the Civil Rights Commission at that time, I believe. And of course, there was always this struggle between the people who were in power and the people who were representing the denied people. Everybody wanted, not everybody, one side wanted everything done right then, and the other side wanted to say, let's wait and see.
How did you put your race together in '72 for the State House of Representatives?
Oh my gracious, how did I put it together? I was doing the same thing I've been doing for, get out in the street and talk to anybody, join whoever would welcome me into a meeting. And try.
Did it take a lot of money to run a race back then?
If it did, I wouldn't have been in it, because I can approach you. But the people were good to me. I had very few incidents where the underground of racial problems impacted my career or even the lawsuits I was involved in.
I read an interview that you gave to, I don't know if you remember the journalist Jack Bass.
Yes, I know Jack.
He interviewed you in 1975 as he was doing a series of interviews across the South about changing Southern politics, and you talked in that interview about having polled in your election a not insignificant portion of the white vote, maybe 20-25% of the white vote.
That's all I needed.
Yeah.
After losing 3 times, we're going to put you on the back porch. Yeah, you go out there with Rusty.
Mrs. Finney is chiding Justice Finney for perhaps being a little modest in this interview, and I can tell myself that's a little bit true, more than a little bit true. You helped found the Legislative Black Caucus immediately on entering the State House.
Yes,
Yeah.
because upon being elected to the State House, I felt that if the caucus was going to be effective, the first thing we had to do was to learn the rules. And in order to be a mechanism for good and change, you had to do that. And the only way I could think of to do that was to have a caucus where you meet and study what the rules are and be prepared to meet the rules head on. That was why I was active with the other people who were in the caucus in formulating it.
Yeah.
You know, there's no need of us being out there shouting and carrying on if we don't know the rules.
Yeah.
And that.
Excuse me. Overall, how did you evaluate your years in the state legislature? Did your relationship with other folks, your capacity to influence legislation?
Oh yes, we became a force. There weren't but 3 of us when I first got there, I think, but we were a force to be considered when the agenda was being adopted or approved. They got a little agenda fight going on over there now, I believe. that ended up in the Supreme Court this
Yes.
week.
Yes, they do. Yeah. Let me ask too now about 1985 and your election to the state Supreme Court. That's what can you tell us
A
about
miracle still happened. You got to believe it.
that?
I ran because some of my friends said we never had anybody who had in recent times, and I thought I could win, and I ran and I won, and it was an interesting challenge and rewarding career.
Yeah. Tell me about that campaign. What was involved in campaigning for the Supreme Court in 1985?
Well, I had an inside track because the South Carolina House of Representatives had 174 members, I believe, something like that. The Senate had 46. And so I naturally had an opportunity to work on the House, and the opposition was a senator, and he worked on the Senate. And despite the fact that he had been a legislator for more years than I had, that I had a larger number of people who were intimately working with me on a daily basis, and that helped me.
And in 1994, of course, you'll be chosen as elected as Chief Justice.
Yes.
Yeah. Can you recall that moment and your reaction? And
Well, you know, I'm a firm believer that if you provide people an opportunity and you do your homework and, how can I say it, you will get some vote. And the people of the legislature elected me as Chief Justice. I was shocked, pleased, but I've always believed that if you work hard, you'll get your share of the vote. You never did ask me about my most famous race that I lost. Who was it that I ran for the South Carolina? I ran for the, what did I run for? Francis, do you remember what I ran for? And I got trounced. I ran for Congress. I've forgotten the year, forgotten who it was. I ran against the current congressman, I believe. You know, write-in campaign. So I was just wild about politics.
yeah.
Well,
What?
you ran 3 times for the House before you won.
That's right.
That's right.
66. Yeah.
I had forgotten about my most famous run. Was it Albert Watson?
I don't recall actually.
I think it was Albert Watson. I'm not sure, but I know that it was an open seat. I was a legitimate citizen. I could run. I ran. Probably got 1,800 votes, but that didn't bother me.
Tell about how Mr. Kennedy invited you to join the
Huh?
Kennedy clan.
Huh?
Robert Kennedy.
Oh well, you know they were trying to hustle me out of South Carolina. Probably somebody offered. I was offered a job in the Justice Department.
By Robert Kennedy. Yeah.
But
Please tell that story. Yeah.
well, you know when you get back, that was gracious day. How many years ago was that? All I remember is I received overtures from the Kennedy administration that because of something they had heard in the rumor that I could come to Washington and become affiliated with the Justice Department. Well, I was enjoying myself where I was. I was a member of the legislature. I was involved in my community, and that was where I wanted to be.
Yeah.
And I was not I didn't know what Washington. I knew what Washington was like because I'd gone to high school in Washington. But I thought that South Carolina had been good to me, and as long as they were good to me, I was going to stay here and work at it.
Let me ask you one final big question, and it's about education, because you've obviously been quite an advocate for education for a long time, and as Chief Justice, you wrote in a case where you
Abbeville versus the state of South Carolina. Go ahead.
Yes, sir.
Tell me about it.
No, please, would you tell me and us about it?
Well, let me tell you what.
We're back after a short break.
Okay.
Just a minute, we're going to talk about Abbeville.
Abbeville was a novel and involved litigation where some of the school districts in the state of South Carolina sought additional support financially. And at the status of the case when it reached the Supreme Court, we were, those of us who felt as I did, that we had to do something to, number one, keep the case alive. We didn't want it to end up being decided and going back and starting all over again. Then I think I probably was enthusiastic that if the case was kept alive, the legislative leaders would have resolved the difference. The dilemma was that the legislative leaders, by and large, were from large counties or from counties that had some basic support of education. They had the tax base. And the smaller counties had the lesser tax base. And so you were trying to walk a line where you keep the state involved in providing education and not give them something out that would have prohibited or stopped the state from supporting education. And so I probably said the thing that I have caught the most flack about in my lifetime was providing, it was almost as bad as separate but equal. And they are still fighting that battle. They have not resolved that battle. There is no way, it's going to be difficult to get the counties that have the tax base to share with the counties that don't have the tax base their tax bases. You know, how they going to justify to their constituents supporting those constituents that they don't represent? And that's the dilemma with which we were confronted with.
Sure, yeah. And I know too that even after you left the bench in 2000, you have worked, you've done work, for example, with Governor Riley.
Yes.
And on efforts to kind of push back against voucher proposals. And I'm thinking all the way back to, say, the Millicent Brown litigation and the question of tuition grants, and how I wonder if you see a connection between that theme over all those years.
Well, I think what I see most is the fact that somehow or another, if South Carolina is going to reach its potential and provide its citizens the kind of public education they need, we have got to get to the point where public education becomes a crying need, a desirable result. We haven't reached that yet. We got this, the latest controversy from down in Charleston is about what's that the company that is Amazon.
Yeah.
We've got to find a way that everybody in South Carolina has got to want to help public education. I could make some comments about what we pay some of our public officials, but I think that would be inappropriate.
Any final thoughts, Justice Finney?
Oh, well, I'm delighted. I'm having a nice time. My children are doing well, and the people have been extraordinarily kind to me. And I think probably the most difficult decisions I made was the fact that in my years in the legislature, I was unalterably opposed to the death penalty. And as my career has gone ahead, I have had to sentence a human being to die. That was the most difficult of the inner struggles that I had. The young man had robbed his grandmother and come into South Carolina and robbed a coin dealer, and then raped one or two women. And of course, in my new job as a circuit judge, I was assigned to try him. And of the women he had raped, one of them lived, one died. And that one who lived testified against him. An Horry County jury determined that the appropriate sanction should be death by electrocution. Now you're talking about hard, that was a hard day's work. But I had taken this oath and
Well, just Finney, I want to thank you so much for spending your morning with us and welcoming us to your home. It's a great privilege and honor for us, and we thank you for sharing these memories.
Okay.
Thank you.
You tell me what you want to know, and I'll tell you what I can tell you.
It's been wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it very much. Did I behave myself sufficiently?
Yes.
Who would you like for me to do a video on next? What are your thoughts about this video? Please share them in the comments. Please be honest in the comments when answering these questions. Share this video with anyone you deem necessary. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel.